Okay, folks, let's get started. We're 5 minutes after, so welcome to everyone again. My name is Callie McNutt. I chair the Birmingham Committee on Foreign Relations. For those of you, I know we have a lot of guests today and we'll have more. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based in Birmingham, Alabama. We were founded back in 1943. At that point, as part of the Council on Foreign Relations, we're now affiliated with the American Committees on Foreign Relations in DC. And we have partner groups across the country and across America's heartland who get together monthly and sometimes more often to discuss important international issues that are going on at the time. We're nonpartisan and we're a nonprofit. So and we're a membership organization. And we exist to educate and engage folks in Birmingham, and now that we're Zooming, people all over on important issues. So just a few housekeeping tips. I think you all hopefully can see the Q&A box. You can ask questions at any point and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. And I think most of you have figured out the chat box, so that's great. Couple little housekeeping things before I introduce our speaker. You all should have gotten an email noting our events coming up. As I've mentioned, we're having a kind of a mini series on Eurasia. There's so much going on over there, so we figured let's go ahead and start there. It's an area that I personally don't know as much about, and I'm guessing that that's true for a lot of our members. Like I said, we are a membership organization, so we exist through dues that our members pay in, and that allows us to, in normal times, bring speakers down to Birmingham and really show them around the city. And it also allows us to send area university college students to DC in the summer for the ACFR's Young Leaders Initiative, which is a great program that really goes in depth with some of our young leaders who are planning to pursue careers in diplomacy or think tanks or something of that nature, international business, et cetera. So a lot of people we've got a ton of new applications in the past 48 hours. That's awesome. And we've had a lot of people pay dues. If you haven't, please do that. We have slashed our dues in half this year. And we've also added a student rate, I think 20, 25 bucks for high school and current college students. So lower barriers to entry. We want as many people to engage with us as possible. Yeah, so please do that. Please check out our website. We have our calendar of events on there. And I think those are my most important things to note. I don't want to bore anyone. Let's see. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker before I keep rambling on. Welcome to those of you who are coming in. I'm actually going to turn the video on. Okay. Yeah, there you are. Okay, perfect. So I'm thrilled today to kick off our year with, one second. I have too many screens open, with Bakhtiyor Nishanov from the International Republican Institute. He is the regional director for Eurasia at IRI. He joined IRI in June of 2010 as a program officer for the Institute's Russia portfolio and currently serves as deputy director for Eurasia, helping oversee programs in Belarus, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, and Ukraine. Prior to that, he was at Freedom House, which is a US-based international human rights advocacy group. Prior to that, he was a development consultant with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Bank, and a number of international organizations, including Internews, Pragma Corporation, Transitions Online, and Winrock International. I know you all have his bio, so and trust that you have read that, so I'm not gonna keep reading it verbatim, but so we're thrilled today to have Bakhti with us, and he's going to give us some background on what's happening right now in Belarus and Kyrgyzstan, who the players are, why it's important for us. And so please join me in virtually welcoming Bakhti to Birmingham.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it, Kelly. And thank you so much for pronouncing my name. I mean, just unbelievable. I mean, this is the third time you and I are talking and you just got it right just like that. And to everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This is a great opportunity. And I love this kind of stuff. And I think, I live in a swamp, so, DC area. And, if I can connect with people from all across America, truly, I'm an immigrant to America. I love this country, and I think there's so much diversity and so much cool stuff happening everywhere. And any opportunity to connect and to have conversations about international development, what's happening in the world, is a great, great opportunity, and I appreciate it. And I apologize for the starkness of my office. The only art I have is what my then 3-year-old drew on that wall, but unfortunately I cannot share that with you because it's a little bit too far. But we're not here to talk about art on my walls or about me necessarily, but I just want to talk a little bit about the organization that I work for and that I represent, and then talk about Belarus and Kyrgyzstan. So I work for the International Republican Institute, and to be clear, although there's, the middle name is the Republican, we are a nonpartisan organization. We work together with the National Democratic Institute, which is our sister organization. And again, despite the middle name, they are not a partisan organization either. But the point is that we work really well together. And this is one of those things that in this town, in DC, I think, it's a rare kind of, foreign policy, and tends to be one of those things where everybody comes together. And, there's a lot of working across the aisle on these issues. So IRI has been around for more than 30 years at this point. We do international development work, right? But then it's international development work is a lot of words and it sounds pretty, but there are a lot of parts to it. And what we do is sort of very interesting and a little bit niche, but I do think it's an incredibly important thing, right? So you have your World Banks, you have, your IMFs and whatnot, and what they care about is poverty, reduction of poverty. They care about those things. But when you do that work, what you realize is that in a lot of countries where we're trying to work on these issues, there's pandemic corruption, there's governance issues, there are issues with lack of competition, transparency, accountability, and this is where we come in. And what we try to do is through increasing political competition and through improving governance systems, make sure that there's no corruption, reduce corruption. I think no corruption is probably one of those goals that we're not going to achieve anytime soon, but reduce corruption, increase accountability, and make sure that people have a say in how they are governed. That's the bottom line. That people, everybody, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter. I worked all over the world. I don't care where you come from. Everybody wants to have a say in how they are governed. And what we try to do is to empower people to do that and make sure that governments are accountable. So I worked on Eurasia, and Eurasia, as Callan pointed out, is a very happening place these days, right? Somebody on Twitter a couple of weeks ago was like, oh, in early 2000s, everybody was studying Middle East, and I studied Eurasia, and I'm happy because look what's going on in Eurasia, which is not to say that Middle East doesn't matter. Obviously it does. But, it used to be for a long time, it was just like, oh, you mean Russia, right? That's what you're talking about, Russia. Oh, former Soviet Union. But it's been 30 years, right? In 1991, it's almost 30 years at this point, and all the 15 countries of the Soviet Union kind of went their own divergent paths. You have Baltic states that are at this point obviously are part of the EU. Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, their GDP growth, tenfold GDP growth in 30 years. They're, you go there, it doesn't feel any different from, I don't know, Germany or anywhere else. It feels like that, right? So you have those, then you have Ukraine, you have Georgia that is generally trying to move toward West. They're trying to, and again, to be clear, when I say East-West, this is not by no means kind of not necessarily commentary on, what's better or worse. It's what people want, right? People's aspirations are to be part of that. They are working really, really hard to get there. You have Armenia that's just 2 years ago had a revolution, peaceful revolution, and it's definitely, on the democratic path. And then you have kind of interesting countries, right? You have all the Central Asian countries that are sort of anywhere when you look at them, there's no, except for Kyrgyzstan, which we'll talk about, none of them are free countries. Freedom House is this, is an organization that, basically ranks all the countries. Obviously a lot of nuance, free, not free, and partly free, and Kyrgyzstan is the only partly free country in that part of the world. So you have that, you have Caucasus, and obviously you have Russia, right? And Russia's been a fascinating story and an interesting country to work on. But we're not here to talk about Russia. There's a whole separate conversation. It's probably can eat up, 2 days of this. So we're not going to talk about that. Let's talk about Belarus and Kyrgyzstan and what is going on there and why it matters. Why, again, if you're not necessarily, I totally recognize that all of you've tuned in, so you care about the international affairs and you care about that. But, as you're having a Thanksgiving dinner, you're talking about Belarus. Some say, well, why do we care? Why should we care about Belarus? And why do we need to even be having a conversation? And why we have so many issues in America? Why we need to be talking about Belarus? I think there are a lot of compelling reasons why we need to be talking about Belarus and Kyrgyzstan and all of these countries of the world, because ultimately, at the end of the day, our investments and our attention or lack of attention always comes back, because we are, like it or not, we are the leader, right? We are one of the leaders, depending on how you look, of this world. And we are ultimately end up being, accountable, responsible for things that are happening in the world. That's the moral aspect of it. There are a lot of practical reasons why we need to be doing it, because if we're not paying attention to that, a lot of bad things can happen there, and then we will pay the price. So there's a moral reason, there are practical reasons, and we can talk about it. So look, Belarus and Kyrgyzstan, two different countries, different parts of the world. Seriously, the only commonality between those two is that they both used to be part of the Soviet Union, right? Obviously, Belarus was part of Russian Empire earlier than Kyrgyzstan. Central Asia was only part of the Russian Empire starting from 1865, 1860s. But nonetheless, they've been part of the Russian Empire together and then part of the Soviet Union. But other than that, one is in Eastern Europe, the second one is Belarus, and then you have Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, and its neighbors with China, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Russia is up there north. And so what's going on in those countries, and what's important? I mean, the one thing that you guys should know about Kyrgyzstan, and I'm sure you guys know about that, is that it used to host a U.S. air base, Manas Air Base. When we were immediately post 9/11, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan were the two Central Asian countries that hosted U.S. air bases and were our partners in the fight against terrorism, international terrorism. And it's only recently, only a few years ago, that we lost that base because the previous president, because Russia pressured Kyrgyzstan to kick us out. To be frank, right? Kyrgyzstan is both Kyrgyzstan and Belarus are very close partners of Russia. They are part of the Eurasian Economic Union, which is something that Russia's been spearheading, something that they want to establish their sort of dominance and their leading role as that country that unites everyone. So they are part of that as well. So that's the commonality that they have too. The other commonality that they have, and I think that's going to sort of lead to where things are and how things are developing, right? And why what's happening in Belarus and Kyrgyzstan is happening, is that these are two countries that have been constantly misgoverned. Two countries. Belarus is a little bit more nuanced, but Kyrgyzstan much more so, right? Looking at Kyrgyzstan, you can see that endemic poverty, corruption, very much part of daily lives of people. We do polling. We have an office there, and we've been doing polling in Kyrgyzstan for about 20 years now. And when you look at the top 3 issues that people are concerned about, the top 3 issues are always of socioeconomic character. It's unemployment, it's corruption. Unemployment, corruption. I mean, boom, those two things. And, so 30 years they've been around. For 20 years we've been doing this polling, and nothing's changed. And people do want change. Belarus is a little bit of a different situation. In Belarus, you have a strongman, and I sort of dislike this a little bit, authoritarian president, right? Strongman, they actually, all these authoritarians actually do like that word, because, it makes them feel like they're mainly strong men, right? So you have a president who's been running the country since 1994, and for all intents and purposes, he sort of tried to create a Soviet Union light. It's they still have these collective farms. They still have this strong government presence in economy. All these giant corporations, plants, and enterprises, they're very much run by the government. They're not privatized. So it's run like that, but in the 30 years, there's a new generation of Belarusians who grew up and who want to be. They look around, they look at Poland. Poland's been a nonstop economic growth since 1994. This is the only country that's even through 2000, through the economic crisis that we've had, they've been growing. And they look at Poland, they look at Baltic states. Minsk is only a 50-minute away drive from the Lithuanian border. They look at them, they started from the same point, but you have Lithuania that is very much, you know, like I said, you know, $35,000 GDP per capita, and you have Belarus of 6,000, right? So they look at them and they're saying, why not us? Belarus started from a stronger point, from a stronger economic footing, but they're looking around and they're asking themselves why we are not like that, and they do want change. So the commonality is that the shared history, shared sort of misgovernance and missed opportunities. And I think the biggest thing is really that, you know, you have a new generation in both of these countries. You have a new generation of people who've grown up and who want something else, who are tired of the old politics. I mean, this is obviously a trend all over the world, but I think it's especially stark in these countries, in the former Soviet countries. And it was especially stark in Belarus because, you know, you have a guy who's been running the country since 1994. And on August 9th, he thought he would have a really clear, easy, road to victory. And I'm talking about President Lukashenko. I sort of don't even want to call him president because he's, at this point, he's just, he's claiming that he's president. He did not win that election. On August 9th, he called an election for August 9th, a couple of months before. He thought, it's going to be a pretty straightforward thing, right? In August, nobody in Belarus is around. Everybody goes to their Dutchess, to their summer homes, and they take their summer vacation. And it's during COVID anyway. So he thought, what I'm going to do, I mean, they were supposed to have an election, but it was supposed to be later in the year. He said, I'm just going to do it in August. Nobody will care. And, basically, it's going to be an easy way to steal this election. So they called it for August 9th. What happened, though, was fascinating. In months and weeks prior to the election, there was this massive outpouring of support for opposition candidates. They allowed previously an English language teacher who up to that point was, she, by her own words, she was a housewife. That's what she calls herself. A homemaker running in opposition to Lukashenko. I mean, and she was able to gather massive crowds. I mean, Lukashenko realized that he was in trouble when literally 3 days before the election, she was able to bring together a crowd of about 70,000 to 80,000 people in Minsk, in the capital of Belarus. So you have this woman who's, virtually came out of nowhere, right? Again, by her own admission, by her own words, she's a homemaker, and she was running against a dictator of this country. And she's running and she's gathering votes, and people are supporting her. And not only that, but also all the other opposition figures who, were disqualified from polls, all of a sudden supporting her. They were disqualified because the government thought, okay, we're going to let her run, and just because nobody's going to vote for her, for God's sakes. But everybody else, they can be part of this. But what those people, other people, they're more qualified, and therefore we're not going to let them run. So they don't run, but they support her. So all of a sudden, a few days before the election, Lukashenko regime realizes they're in big trouble. So on the election day, there's a massive operation to steal this election. I mean, they were just absolutely insane. I mean, social media, God bless social media, right? I'm sure this is how they used to do it, but now it's so much easier to document. You literally go in with your phone and you can see it. There was literally a scene, one scene where head of a local election commission, she literally had to, because they had so many, they had all these votes that they had to dump because these were ballots for the opposition candidate. She literally gets somebody's filming this thing. She gets a rope out her window, and she has this backpack, and she just starts climbing down the rope because they didn't know what to do with all these ballots cast in favor of the opposition candidate. Because all of a sudden you only have 20,000 people in your election in this district, but all of a sudden you have 40,000 ballots because 20,000 of them are fake. So they didn't know what to do. I mean, there was the level and scale of the effort to steal this election was incredible. So August 9 comes and goes. That's a Sunday. Lukashenko claims victory. He says 87% of the vote that he's gotten. The same night, people know who they voted for. They talk, they communicate. There's just an ad hoc, just people are coming out, right? And, you know, it had happened before too, to be clear. But, you know, in the past, it was 5,000, 6,000 people. In a matter of days, this goes from being a 10,000 people, you know, just outpouring in Minsk to a completely nationwide, national. And, you know, because, you know, everybody's like, well, there's an urban divide, urban rural divide, all this kind of stuff. It is true, but literally all across the country, all across different age groups, people are coming out and they're protesting this election result, right? And Lukashenko is lost. I mean, you had back-to-back, this happened on August 9th, every Sunday, you had anywhere from 100 to 150,000 people in Minsk, in the capital alone, coming out in opposition to this, right? To the election results. Now, Lukashenko's lost. There are all these, you know, all government corporations there, they go on strike. There are strikes against him. So he's lost. He doesn't know what to do. But then Russians, right? Russia is the biggest ally of Belarus. Then they start flying in operators from Russia. And this is not a sort of like conspiracy theory. This is, I mean, it's a well-documented, it's by Russians and by Belarusians, it's by their own admission. They start flying in, you know, when the national, basically like their NPR, right? But it's a national TV corporation goes on strike, they fly in Russian journalists, and then Russian journalists basically start pumping out this absolutely BS story about this color revolution, that this is being coordinated by Lithuania and Poland. And, you know, that this is not true, that that Lukashenko has won. We have some data, and this is I cannot disclose the sources, but I can vouch for that data, where we do know for a fact that they were neck and neck. So she got about 45% of the vote. He got about 45% of the vote. So nobody got 50 plus. So it definitely should have gone to the second round. He claimed 80% of the vote. Now, people know that people try to organize on both sides. The most important thing to know about Belarus is that the protests have been incredibly peaceful. And there's not been, knowing how Belarusian police can react and reacts to any sort of peaceful protest, these people went out of their way not to antagonize them. These are peaceful, and when I say peaceful, and to be clear, you know, this is not driven by a certain age group only, right? This is young people, definitely. But literally 2 days ago, there was a march of pensioners, right? Of babushkas. Literally, that's what they call themselves, right? March babushek, which is march of babushkas. So this is across all kind of, you know, strata. So you have that dynamic going on. In all of a sudden, Belarus, that, you know, initially was basically, you know, Lukashenko regime that, you know, didn't know what to do. He secretly inaugurated, there was a secret inauguration. No one knew that it was happening. Secretly inaugurates himself, claims power, but the country is now divided between the, you know, at this point, I mean, there's no real data, but, you know, 60, 70, 80% of people who are against Lukashenko and then the regime, and people who are supporting this regime, and people who are supporting this regime are, you know, basically people close to Lukashenko and law enforcement. And law enforcement is loyal at this point. There have been multiple cases when people just, you know, law enforcement officers publicly stated that they will not be supporting Lukashenko. But nonetheless, Lukashenko has done a smart thing as an evil smart thing, whereby he just published the lists of names of all the law enforcement, senior law enforcement officers that are supporting him, right? And if you have that information out there, you've compromised them. So even if they want to go the other way, all of a sudden, you know, they have lost their capacity and their ability to do that in a clean manner because they've been compromised by the regime. So interesting dynamic here for, you know, as far as US is concerned. Before Belarus is, you know, so you have Russia, right? You have, and immediately next to them, you have Ukraine, which obviously, you know, Ukraine has been pro-West, pro-US. We've been allies. Ukraine and Russia are technically, well, for all intents and purposes, are at war. Russia is waging a war in the east of Ukraine, and they've annexed Crimea, right? So you have Ukraine that is definitely pro-West. And you had Belarus that is always, Lukashenko has been smart about it, right? whenever he wanted something from Russia, he would go initially kind of, play around a little bit with DC, with the West, with Brussels, get, and then make sure that, Moscow and Kremlin, they're upset about it. And then they would go and say, no, I'm sorry. All I need for my loyalty, for continued loyalty, is $1 billion, right? And Russia, through subsidized gas, natural gas, oil, and natural gas, through basically all these things, they were supporting this regime. And we were, before this election, it was interesting because Secretary Pompeo actually was in Belarus. We were sort of kind of resetting our relationship with Belarus, because the idea was, okay, so, to draw them away from Russia, right? So we were sort of resetting that relationship. So that it's been interesting because, this happened, and very quickly, this developed very quickly. Look, and Moscow did not rush to support Lukashenko immediately, because clearly they realized, okay, they were not happy with Lukashenko and the US having closer ties. So, they did not rush to defend him. In fact, for the first couple of days, RT, all the propaganda, Russian propaganda, was very much kind of against Lukashenko. It's only 2 weeks after when Lukashenko had multiple conversations with Putin that they come out and they came up with this narrative of the color revolution being directed from the West, kind of thing. So a lot of, again, why we care, why we should care about Belarus. Belarus is a country that is been sort of teetering, right? You have people in Belarus. It's been interesting. They always sort of wanted to be the bridge, right? When you ask them, do you see themselves? It's probably the closest country to Russia in terms of, they see the cultural connections to Russia. Russia were always the strongest of any other state, right? But they also do want to be part of the West. So they always sort of wanted to be that bridge country, right? So, but over the last year or two, even among the elites, there was sort of a lean toward the West, because, they were not getting what Moscow was pushing too much for a unified state. Putin's dream obviously has been that he can incorporate Belarus into Russia, and this has been ongoing since mid-90s. So and it's not been happening. So Moscow's been unhappy. They've been pressuring Lukashenko and elites, and people have been kind of leaning west. And this is a historic opportunity for us to really win an ally, win somebody who's going to be a strong ally in that region, right? You have Baltic states, you have Ukraine, and Belarus would have been that incredible win for us diplomatically. So this is why Belarus matters to us. I mean, for all practical reasons, right? I mean, regardless of what happens next, Russia and US are not going to become friends, right? Anytime soon, right? So having more allies in that part of the world is incredibly important to us. So that's Belarus. There's a lot of information. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions during Q&A, but let's talk about Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan, right? Right there, smack of Central Asia. China is right there. They trade with China extensively. They're part of the Russian Eurasian Economic Union, like I said. They are part of the on a Silk Road, right? So they are right there, and like I said, they were an ally in a war against a partner in a war against terrorism. You have all these things. Incredibly impoverished country. Kyrgyzstan, unlike the very rich Kazakhstan that's got oil and uranium and whatnot, they have nothing. They literally have nothing, and they only have literally one gold mine that is they operate there's a Canadian company that operates it. It's a whole different story. So they got nothing, and incredibly, it's a country that went through, this is today, as we, things are dynamic, their president resigned. He resigned yesterday, but the parliament accepted his resignation today, through 5 presidents over 30 years. Now, in comparison, Tajikistan, that is right next to it, has had 1 president since independence. Nothing's changed. Kazakhstan has had 2. Uzbekistan had 2 because 1 died. Turkmenistan had 2 because 1 died, right? This one actually has been a very dynamic and incredibly dynamic politically country that went through 2 revolutions in 2005 and the much more violent one in 2010. Each one brought a new set of presidents and ruling elites, but they had parliamentary elections 2 weeks ago this Sunday, and they had a very high threshold of 7%. There were 16 parties that participated, and 3 pro-government ones made it into the parliament, and only 1 opposition one, that it can be seen as opposition one. So people were unhappy, right? People said, and there was massive, again, social media played a massive role in this, because there were all these recordings of vote buying. Literally, people, it was, I mean, even the price, I mean, it was $30 per vote, essentially, right? Per, you know, so you get a vote, you get a piece of paper, you get $30, you sign, boom. People were just collecting them and then dumping them, right? You had that. People saw the results. People were incredibly unhappy. The night of the election results, people came out on the main square of the country. And we're talking about a little bit earlier, you have a situation where 2,000 people, it was 2,000 people. I mean, again, contrasting with Belarus, you know, you had hundreds, thousands of people protesting. You had 2,000 people in Kyrgyzstan come out. They broke into what they call White House. White House is where both the president and parliament are housed. So they broke into it, and literally in one day, they organized a revolution. The following day, mayors of the major cities resigned. The speaker of the parliament resigned. Prime minister resigned in 3 days, and president resigned today. I mean, again, this was the election was 2 weeks this Sunday, right? So we're talking about less than 2 weeks. And you have a situation where all of a sudden there's people who were in prison, politicians, opposition, some of them opposition politicians who were in prison, they got busted out of prison. And you literally have a situation that a former MP, a member of parliament, who was in prison less than 2 weeks ago, is now the prime minister of the country. And he's also acting president because the president resigned today. So, I mean, Kyrgyzstan, truly a country of opportunities, right? You can rewrite your history in less than 2 weeks. Now, here's the reality. And this is an important point. The reality is, I think some of the people looked at it and said, well, it's people power and fantastic and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I think the way this all transpired is indicative of incredibly poor institution building in a country, right? You literally have institutions that cannot withstand, a power of 2,000 people. And to be clear, not that this election was honest or fair, or it was free, but it was not fair, right? So to be clear, the process, they're very good about it. I mean, everything that was happening was not happening. It was not like Belarus. It was not like they were like literally running around with ballots. It was not like that at all. This was different. But nonetheless, this was a situation where, people came in and they've just got rid of it. And now you have a prime minister who was in prison. And to be clear, the prime minister was in prison not because he was in opposition and they threw him. This is not a Malaysia situation, right? This is a situation where he had kidnapped a governor of a region in Kyrgyzstan, right? So he had kidnapped and he was in prison for kidnapping. So the person that they've just appointed head of their sort of KGB, right? This person is not a nice person either, right? So there are all these concerns about, because in 2010 there was massive ethnic clashes that saw, hundreds of ethnic Uzbeks in the south of the country killed, and the person who now is the head of the National Security Service was implicated in that. He literally made a statement where he said, in Kyrgyzstan, ethnic Kyrgyz people should be given priority, and Russians and Uzbeks and Turks and Chinese and everybody else, they cannot possibly be at the same level as us. So now this guy is head of the National Security Service. Here's the thing though, this is where all the doom and gloom, right? But here's the thing, I am personally optimistic because they've just lowered the threshold they're going to have new parliamentary election, they're going to have new presidential election, they're going to do all that kind of stuff. They've just lowered the threshold for parliament from 7 to 5%. they reduced the amount of money that it takes to be able to be nominated and that kind of stuff, because you have to, there's a certain amount of money that you have to make sure that you put into that if you don't win, you basically get it back. They've lowered that. So you will have increased political competition, 100%. You do have a very, very strong civil society. You have very poor and very poorly run governance systems, but you have very strong civil society. I mean, where it's been, I think, over the last few months, what you see in Kyrgyzstan is, especially with the COVID, the government failed completely. Civil society stepped in. I mean, you had people, you know, literally gathering money and bringing in, you know, medical equipment. People themselves were organizing, and they were organizing this hospital beds and that kind of stuff. So you have very poor governance system, like I said, but the civil society is very strong in that country. So that gives me hope that Kyrgyzstan too, you know, is going to go through, you know, these are the people who are in charge right now are not necessarily the best people. I think what is most, I think what's worst about this situation is that young people and women were the driving force behind this, but they're now left behind. The sort of old elites, also, you know, they came back. They just recycled, you know, elites. But nonetheless, I think the accountability aspect is going to be a little bit stronger, just because they know same thing that happened to this group of people, you know, 2 weeks ago can happen to them. Now, the concern is that, you know, there are some with this prime minister, that there are ties to mafia and so on and so forth. But if that's true, you're going to have a situation where, you know, Russia, and this is one of those rare instances where Russia and United States interests will align nicely. You know, Russia's already announced that they stop any financial assistance to Kyrgyzstan, right? They've immediately stopped it because they don't want to be supporting, you know, potentially people with ties to mafia. So you have that. Our embassy has put out a fantastic statement where we literally said, I mean, it was just, I mean, I've never seen a statement like this where we said, we're now going to be supporting people tied to organized crime. I mean, I've never seen a statement like that, especially since now those people are in charge. So I think between the international pressure, domestic kind of, you know, pressure, you will have a situation where, you know, I mean, these people will be there, but I don't think they're going to, unless they generally deliver on the, you know, on the job and corruption front, that they're not going to stick around. Now, again, why is Kyrgyzstan important? Why we should care about it? I mean, it's a stand somewhere in Central Asia. Who cares, right? But again, they are part of this incredibly dynamic region. Central Asia is right there, smack in the middle between China. We want to counterweight. I mean, long term, I personally believe China is obviously going to be our biggest challenge, depending on how you look at it, right? It's going to be, you know, it's something that, you know, we will need to counterweight, and those countries are right there. And they have, they've been, Kazakhstan in particular, Kyrgyzstan as well, they've been, despite the sort of, you know, they constantly kind of, you know, looking over at China because they're afraid of China to an extent. They have not been, for example, they had not signed this letter supporting, you know, Uyghur concentration camps, right? Bunch of other countries have, they have not. So, you know, if we want to sort of, we do want friendly governments there. When I say friendly, not pro-American necessarily, but governments at least that on a major issues will align with us, because we do need, that region is, Kazakhstan is the 6th largest country in the world. You know, Uzbekistan is the, you know, 3rd most populous country after Russia and Ukraine in all of former Soviet Union, and they're going to overtake Ukraine just because of a population dynamic. So you have a giant, you know, relatively speaking, for that region, you have big populations. You have, you know, educated populations and whatnot. So, you know, creating those bases of support there and friendly allies is important. It's just generally important for us. Long term, it's definitely going to pay off. So, in all fairness to, again, you know, I know not to sort of, not at all to be partisan or whatever, but this administration actually has done a really good job of reaching out to Central Asia and building relationships there. There are some incredibly, you know, smart, and I think, you know, people with good kind of long-term vision who have cultivated those relationships. And I think, again, you know, if you think about it, I mean, you look at a map, you have Russia, you have China, and right in between them, you have this, you know, Central Asia sitting there. So I think, you know, cultivating those and making sure that we have strong relationships that we can down the line utilize is going to be important. So anyway, I know I've talked way too much. I'm sorry, guys. And if I haven't covered something, I'll be more than happy to do Q&A. respond to any Q&A questions. But anyway, that's
awesome. Thank you so much. That was a lot to take in and super informative. So why don't I give you a second, Bakhti, to look at the Q&A, and there's quite a few in there, and maybe you can just kind of scan and pick where you want to pick. And in the meantime, while you read those, I am going to send you guys a poll asking. Just give him a second to read the questions, because we have quite a few that have been asked.
I think there are, I think the one, and I think there are a few. I'll be more than happy, but super quickly on the U.S. I think it's Ambassador Kotelia, right? Asking about the Lithuania LNG, U.S. LNG. One of the things that we're trying to do in that region, and that we have achieved with the Baltic states, for example, is we provide. They don't depend on Russian gas. I mean, when I was in Lithuania actually exactly a year ago, maybe a little bit earlier than this, this was one of the things that we've talked about. We brought Ukrainian MPs, and we've talked energy dependence. If you can get rid of energy dependence to Russia, these countries all of a sudden have so much more room for maneuver, right? Because Russia's blackmails these countries through energy, right? It's, well, we're going to turn it off because you haven't done that.
So I was playing with a feature. Keep going.
No. Sorry, I wasn't sure. So we've done this with Lithuania. Lithuanians at this point, they used to 100% depend on Russian natural gas. When we were there last year, they said depending on how cold and whatever it gets, maybe 10 to 20%. So that's an incredible. I mean, they've done it through energy efficiency. They've done this through a lot of things, and LNG was one of the things that we sell. Was one of the things that we talked about, and absolutely, when Secretary Pompeo was in Belarus, that was one of the things that they talked. The idea being that if Belarus is not that dependent on Russian natural gas, then they'll have more opportunity to engage with everyone else, and they have Russia's not going to be able to kind of jerk them back every time they give them a leash, they go too far out there, and then they jerk them back, so they will not be able to do it. Unfortunately, with this election, there were some immediately afterward. There were some working groups. Belarus also granted. We have not had an ambassador to Belarus in years, and we've appointed a U.S. ambassador to Belarus. So that was an interesting. The timing of all of this, was supposed to. We're supposed to kind of cultivate this relationship further, but with this election, and at this point, legitimacy of Lukashenko being in question. We don't know where we're going to be. We have made, the State Department has made a couple of statements on Belarus. And again, this is, and they were sort of more general and generic about, respecting the will of people and, making sure that there is no violence and that sort of stuff. But, we haven't really, with everything else I think going on in the world, this unfortunately has not been a massive priority. So as to, who is, Plan B person for Putin in Belarus. I don't know who the Plan B person is, but I can tell you that Lukashenko is not Plan A. I think there's no question in my mind, and if you follow Belarus pretty closely, there's no question of sort of how long it took Russia to sort of spool these lies about and come in and support Lukashenko's completely insane narratives. It's very clear. I mean, they recognize that Lukashenko is not their guy, right? I mean, they want a union state, and Lukashenko is not going to deliver that. It's been interesting too, because, sort of, again, I think Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's the opposition candidate who's now in Lithuania, she's also been interestingly not antagonistic towards Russia, because I think, again, sort of recognizing the sort of the cultural ties and, people. I think this was a very interesting one, right? Unlike Maidan, for example, right? In Ukraine, Maidan was a very much internationally, it was a split between, where Russia is going to go. I'm sorry, Ukraine is going to go, right? West or east, This was not the case in Belarus. In Belarus, this was driven not by geopolitics. This was driven purely on domestic issues. This was, you had a terrible mishandling. Lukashenko, I mean, famously is one of the very few countries, regimes in the world that they absolutely denied even existence of COVID. This is a guy who said, all you need to do is take a shot of vodka and go to Banya, and there's nothing gonna, like literally, I mean, that's what he said. I mean, I'm not even trying to be funny here. He said, just take a shot of vodka, you'll be fine. Absolute mishandling of COVID situation in Belarus. Economy is in a bad shape, all the kind of stuff. This was purely domestic issue. But I think Russia sees an opportunity to try to, the reason why they have not been so openly, backing him is because this is an opportunity for them to try to get in someone who's going to be friendlier to them, friendlier as in, which is ironic because you think, Lukashenko, of course he's friendly, but rather not necessarily friendly in rhetoric, but rather somebody who's actually going to deliver the Union state. And I don't know if they know who that person is, because for years, Lukashenko's absolutely dominated the political stage. There are some polling, name recognition wise, the only person who even people recognize as they're foreigners in Mackay, nobody else. People do not recognize. They only know Lukashenko, and that's it. To them, to Belarusians, Lukashenko is there, right? And obviously now they have the Tikhanovskaya, but before that, that was not the case. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic in Belarus. Commonality of Lukashenko and former dictator Ceausescu back in the 90s. That's an interesting one. I think I don't think it's going to be as abrupt. I think Lukashenko's transition of Belarus rather is probably not going to be a sort of clean. I don't think there's going to be like Ceausescu's like, okay, he's no more, and therefore we sort of turn the page. I think with Belarus is going to be different. I think we are looking at a long protracted sort of engagement with with political actors there. And it's all been driven by Belarusians themselves. I mean, it's been incredible watching, Belarusians, unlike say, one of my absolute favorite countries in the world is, for example, Georgia, right? Georgia is a very, very politically active, and they care about what's going on. And for a long time, that was just not the case in Belarus. But in Belarus, it was like, that's kind of, Lukashenko is just this weird, kind of guy who's out there. I'm living my life, it's all good. But I think they finally making that connection, and I think it's different. So I think this is going to be a different transition. But I'm hopeful, because I don't think there's no necessarily. I don't think there's a whole lot of interest on anyone's part to keep Lukashenko around for too long. So, but of course, these things can, as we've seen in Syria, these things can. I mean, not that I'm equating, not at all, and I'm not a Middle East expert, to be very clear. But these things can definitely drag on, right? So, in that sense, I don't think it's going to be a sort of clear cut and as in transitions in other countries. I think with both, I think sort of obviously happy to answer any other questions, but I think the one thing in both of these countries, I know we sort of, when you do day to day, I think one of the sort of takeaways that I want you guys to have is, day to day, when you look at it, it does seem like it's just this constant, wall of negative news, right? That these things are just kind of like constantly, it's like I always talk about, like, Game of Thrones, a bad guy dies, and then and you're just happy for like 2 days, and then a horrible and even worse guy shows up, right? All of a sudden, right? So it's been sort of like that. But I think when you take a kind of 30,000-foot view on what's going on in these countries, I think the big thing is sort of birth. I mean, and in Belarus, I don't mean to make it sort of dramatic, but people have been talking about birth of a nation. People have been talking about birth of a sort of national consciousness, if you will, right? It's been interesting because, Belarus, of all the former Soviet countries, per capita, they've lost most people in the Second World War, right? So they've never been able to kind of restore the number of their people, for example, and they've always been very much sort of, kind of like dominated by this whole Russian, narrative about, Belarus. And I think truly, when you look at it, there is a sort of a, narrative about who, Belarusians are. And I think these developments shape them. And I think it's going to be good for the country in the long term. And the same, and obviously you have this very well educated kind of, younger kind of, population that is not massive by any means, but they are truly the sort of, kind of, agents of change, if you will, right? And they've all developed sort of on their own in Belarus. And I think that's the good news. And I think they will continue. There is no returning to status quo in Belarus. I think that's the important thing. But as far as the in Kyrgyzstan, I think the takeaway also is sort of positive. Again, like I said, there's a strong civil society. There's a generational change, and I do think that long term, as painful and as horrible things look when you watch them day to day, blow by blow. I think long term we're looking at potential breakthrough. When Kyrgyzstan can kind of break through this cycle of constant revolution. I mean, this is technically a third revolution they've had in the last 15 years, and it's probably, as much as I like revolutions, probably a little bit too much. So institution building, tackling long-standing issues, I think is going to be something that there's a national consensus around that. So I think that's the sort of positive thing. Anyway, sorry, I know it's been a lot.
Yeah, have a glass of water. Folks, if you do have questions, you can ask them in the Q&A box. I want to, I think you kind of touched on this, but in Kyrgyzstan, from my quick reading of what's been going on, the phrase that came to mind, because it's been in our lexicon recently, is the cure worse than the disease? Because it seems like, and I could have this wrong, but yeah, there's these kind of bad actors in the inner circle of the former now president, but those are some of the same people who have co-opted the protest. Can you just tell us a little bit, and then the role of criminal organizations there? Why are they so embedded, it seems, in the country?
Absolutely. I think this is, there's been, I'm just going to plug this little website, kloop.kg. They've been doing in cooperation with the OCCPR. This is just a big kind of, corruption investigative journalism outfit. They've been doing reports on organized crime in Kyrgyzstan, and some of the very same people who've been named in it are now part of this government, or whether directly involved or sort of behind the scenes, kind of running the show. So again, it's a little bit not to get too much in the weeds, but there's no question, right, that the people that came to power right now, that they have ties to organized crime. Again, I mean, it's a well documented sort of set of data. The thing, I mean, the person who is the prime minister and acting president, I think he's sort of least implicated in a sense that he's not. You cannot directly tie him to any of that, but he was definitely in those circles. The sense of unhappiness with the result of the election has definitely been co-opted by these groups. And again, this now prime minister was in prison, and the very fact that they went and he was the first person they grabbed them out of prison, sort of indicative of that they were he's been part of this, not planning necessarily, but at some point he plugged in, and he's also, I think could be described, but, as a nationalist, for example, right? I mean, this is, again, this is a guy who just appointed this guy who said that, Kyrgyz should have priority over, or should have a higher standing than other ethnic groups in the country, for example. He's just appointed this guy as the head of their KGB, GKMB. So definitely the sort of there are nationalist tendencies. That said, I totally understand and sort of not to be, in my field, skepticism and pessimism always pays off much more than optimism. Like 90% of cases, you're right if you had said, well, things will develop badly. It's going to be a horrible thing. But I still am, despite these developments, and again, not to sort of go too much in the weeds, but despite these documented sort of data about the connections to organized crime and whatnot, I think the international pressure and domestic pressure is going to be strong enough for them to either step down. Because the thing is, if Russia's not going to work with them, we are not going to work with them. EU is not going to work with them, right? Right, and then they have to, and this is a country that is very much donor dependent. If they don't have that, and they cannot deliver, and I don't know how you deliver on jobs and growth and employment if basically all of your opportunities for the assistance are gone. That's just not going to happen. And if that's the case, I just don't see them being there, sticking around for a long time. They just can't. And again, Kyrgyz people are sort of no nonsense people. If they don't get if they don't deliver, they're probably going to just get rid of them as quickly as as they got in. In fact, today, as the prime minister took on the responsibilities of acting president, one of the MPs literally stood up and said, "Don't forget how you came to be in this position, and don't forget that you can be removed from this position as quickly." So obviously, like I said, they have resources in terms of organized crime and their financial resources, but you cannot run a country for a long time like that. They either have to deliver, and if that's the case, that remains to be seen. But we'll see. I still am, cautiously optimistic about how things will turn out in Kyrgyzstan.
Okay. Well, before we let you go, I'm gonna do some housekeeping follow up with everybody. But I know we're at our hour mark, and we're gonna wind down. So if you want to look at the rest of the questions and see if you'll get the last word. If there's one more thing you want to say or leave us with, I'll let you do that at the very, very end. But those of you who weren't here for the first couple minutes, I just wanted to let you know a few things. If there are topics you want to hear about, please let me know. If you work with an organization or a school, K through 12, university, I see we have some Birmingham Southern folks on this call. We want to work with you, so please reach out. Let's partner. Also, we want to be a resource for the community and educate on all these issues. So Zoom is giving us an opportunity to do that at a higher level, and we want to take advantage of it. So please keep that in mind. Please go to our website, birminghamcommitteeonforeignrelations.org, to get all the information and pay your dues, which we really, really appreciate. And then, as Bakhti mentioned, we have on our call one of our next speakers, Ambassador, where is he still on? I don't see a two. I don't know if yeah, there he is. Some of you know we have the former Georgian ambassador to the US, Bakhtiyor Nishanov, who will be joining us in 2 weeks to talk about Georgia's upcoming elections and also just regional dynamics at play with their neighbors. And there's going to be a wine component. Many of you know that Georgia is the birthplace of wine. I don't know if that's disputed with any other countries, but we are going to have a wine component to that event. So that's going to be neat. And next week on Wednesday, you'll be getting all this information immediately after this call, but we will have the directors of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Armenian service and Azerbaijani service talk with us about Nagorno-Karabakh and this disputed territory and what's going on there with their fighting. So those are our upcoming events. Please pay your dues. Please reach out if you have questions or ideas. And thank you all for being here. And I'm going to leave it now. And by the way, if your questions didn't get answered and we can answer them, and by we, I mean Bakhti, we'll try to get to those as well. But any feedback you have on the format also is highly appreciated. So with that, I will leave our speaker with the last word.
Thank you so much. This was fun. And again, I do apologize if I gave a little bit too much information, you guys, but Eurasia, as I mentioned before, Eurasia is definitely happening. I mean, you have Belarus, you have Kyrgyzstan, you have Nagorno-Karabakh, which I absolutely not going to touch because I do work on Armenia, but Nagorno-Karabakh is a whole separate set of its own complexity. So painful memory for a lot of people involved. So I'm not going to touch that, but that's happening, that's burning, right? And that's the sort of thing that sort of there are all these regional actors who are getting involved. So I think that's an important thing. Georgia will have elections at the end of this month, and just sort of a plug for the ambassador's speech. Georgia is an incredibly dynamic, incredibly amazing place, and you definitely should pay attention to it. It's our best and biggest ally in all of Caucasus, and they've delivered more than enough. They've been part of our military operations in Afghanistan, and all along the way they've contributed tremendously. So you should do that. Moldova will have elections, presidential elections. It's not president. I mean, Moldova has parliamentary republics. It's a parliamentary republic, therefore, presidential elections. It's not that important, but nonetheless, it's going to be happening. Kyrgyzstan just had an election where incumbent won like with 90% of the vote. Okay, yeah, that's a cool thing. And the one sort of a tidbit just to kind of leave you with is with Kyrgyzstan, with all these transitions in Kyrgyzstan, every president, like I said, there were 5, and I think I put it on my Twitter, and everyone's like, what's up with this? And they have 5 presidents. Each one of them either left or was forced out at the age of 61. So the Kyrgyzstan has this curse of 61. So at your next happy hour or whatever, you'll like, hey, listen, I know something about this country that you probably will be shocked to know. Like, what? So anyway, that's how you get how you hook your people. I know you guys. I don't need to hook you because obviously you turn out to do this. But this was fun, and I'll be more than happy to. I don't if it's I can sort of my email. This is my email. I don't know if it's okay to do it, maybe not, but this is my email. Feel free to shoot me an email, and then I'm also on Twitter at this. So I'll look forward to connecting with you guys. And
I do want to ask you, there was a resource you mentioned that I didn't catch. That was
yes, if you sort of gonna go into Kyrgyzstan this Klub KG, Kyrgyzstan, for all its faults, I mean, it's a partly free country as defined by Freedom House, and they have incredibly resilient and strong local media, independent media, which is in Belarus it's just not the case. I mean, there are independent media, but they're outside of the country in Belarus. They don't let them operate within the country. Now, Kyrgyzstan actually does have that. Anyway, so thank you, Chuck, for your kind words, and I appreciate you guys. It was fun. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chuck, for being there in case my computer failed me. We'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.